let's take a walk through Psalm 14 using our 3C framework. We're going to begin with the context, looking at the psalm as a whole, 4 components of that: genre, setting, theme, and structure. We note in starting that it's to the choir master of David, so not a psalm of David this time. A psalm is a genre of song, but of David implies Davidic authorship. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, they do abominable deeds. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. What genre is this? Not clear? Not clear exactly. So whereas most of our individual laments begin with a cry to God, this begins with a statement. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. And while there are elements of lament in it, it's not a pure classic lament, at least not according to the normal structural markers that we've been looking at. As a result, the genre of the psalm is contested, meaning different scholars take different views. Most still consider Psalm 14 a lament, and I think that's the right classification, but it has definite wisdom themes. So wisdom psalms are about the foolish and the wise, it's about the righteous and the wicked, and so on. And so this allusion to the fool is consistent with it being a wisdom psalm. And then the content of what follows, namely the path of foolishness with the behavior that goes with it, causes some to see it as a wisdom psalm. Some even consider it a prophetic psalm because it has some statements that are distinctly prophetic. So the genre is contested. Let's say, for pragmatic purposes, that it's a lament psalm with definite wisdom themes embedded within it. What is the setting of the psalm? Again, very little to go on beyond the general. So we know that it's attributed to David as a psalm of David. And beyond that, we can't pinpoint any setting in David's life that would fit it. There's one fascinating proposal. The word for fool here is the Hebrew word Nabal. And we do know that David interacted at one stage in his life with a fool called Nabal or Nabal. So that's interesting. Probably wouldn't read too much significance into that, but it's certainly interesting. Beyond that, what we can say is that the psalmist is looking over the society, and what he sees is wholesale corruption, godlessness, people disregarding the Lord, saying in their hearts there's no God. And we can debate whether that's proper atheism or just practical atheism, probably the latter in their context. But then as a result, their lives degenerate into corruption and perversity and all kinds of evil. So that's a broad setting. What's the theme about? Well, it's a lament then about the wholesale rejection of God in society and how that rejection then manifests itself in widespread godlessness. The structure of the psalm is tricky. I couldn't make sense of it very well myself. It seemed to have, and even the ESV supports this, it seems to have a collection of short strophes that don't easily lend themselves to seeing a development or a flow of thought in them. So the best I found came from Van Gemeren, and Van Gemeren basically suggested that we've got an introductory strophe, just verse 1, and a concluding strophe, just verse 7. The first is about the fool's corruption. He just calls it the fool. I think it's about the fool's corruption. And then the last one is about the faithful's expectation. My words, not his. And in between those, we have 2 strophes. So not the way it's laid out in the ESV, but verses 2 and 3 give us the Lord's perspective. Notice how the Lord looks down from heaven, and what follows is the Lord's perspective. The other middle strophe, verses 4 to 6, give us the psalmist's perspective, or what Van Gemeren calls the prophetic perspective. So the psalmist under the inspiration of God's Spirit, gives us his view. So he talks about the evil who eat up my people and do not call upon the Lord. At first glance, when I read this, I thought it was still the Lord speaking in verse 4. But then why is he speaking about himself in the third person? So most likely the speaker has shifted to the psalmist here. And so we've got two perspectives on this wholesale rejection of the Lord. So if we run through the psalm, we've got the fool's corruption. Then we've got the Lord's perspective on what's going on in verses 2 and 3. Then we have the psalmist's perspective as a prophet. And lastly, we have the faithful's expectation, the expectation of God's people. Let's talk about the content of Psalm 14. As usual, we're going to do this fairly quickly. So we begin with this first strophe about the fool's corruption. And the opening statement is very revealing and powerful. The fool says in his heart, there is no God, Ein Elohim. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. In Hebrew, whenever there's references to a fool in the Hebrew Bible, it's not primarily talking about someone who's intellectually deficient. It's primarily talking about someone who's morally deficient. It's the person who thinks that they can live in defiance of God's law and his commandments and his revealed truth and be fine. So the idea is that it is foolish to defy the Almighty King, and that never ends well for you. And so yeah, we have this claim that the fool says in his heart, there is no God. The claim that there's no God is the fool's way of defending his desire to live however he wishes. It's not so much his intellectual doubts as his immoral desires that drive his desire to deny the existence of God. And so the consequence of that denial quickly manifests. They are corrupt, they do abominable deeds, and radical statement here. There is none who does good. None who does good. Really? None? There's none who does good. This becomes a key claim in the New Testament to point to the fact that human nature is corrupt, depraved, fallen, and that we can't save ourselves. We need the redemption that Christ provides. So having laid this portrait that the fools have rejected God and wholesale corruption is resulting, we now get the Lord's perspective on this. The Lord looks down from heaven on the children of man. What an incredible picture. We've seen already repeatedly in recent Psalms this image that God sits on his heavenly throne. And now he looks down from that heavenly throne on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. Are there any amidst the corruption of society who are looking for the Lord and seeking to obey him? And the answer is no. They've all turned aside. Together they've become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. So this portrait of a wholesale rejection of God, we're reminded perhaps of the days of Noah, when there was such a mass rejection of God and his ways. Now the psalmist seems to speak, and we get the psalmist's perspective in verse 4, 5, and 6. Have they no knowledge, all the evildoers? Don't they know? And you can hear this is more than a intellectual question. It's a heart's cry. Have they no knowledge? All the evildoers who eat up my people, who devour my people as they eat bread, and do not call upon Yahweh. So one wonders if their rejection of God is actually just specifically the rejection of Yahweh, the true God. Maybe they're still following other gods, as we know happened repeatedly throughout history. They are in great terror. Now it's as if the tone changes here and the psalmist sees into the future. So you have this prophetic oracle that comes through. They are in great terror, he says, for God is with the generation of the righteous. So he looks into the future, and it's not quite so grim that everyone has abandoned God. There is a generation who are with the Lord, and God is with them, and those who have forgotten God are going to be in great terror. would you shame the plans of the poor? You would shame the plans of the poor. This is the psalmist speaking to the wicked. But the Lord is his refuge. Psalm 11 immediately comes to mind. In fact, again, this language that God is a refuge for the poor. And the poor here is the believing community, those who are oppressed, victimized, despised, but God is his refuge. And then the psalm ends with the faithful's hope. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion when the Lord restores the fortunes of his people. This statement here, in some translations, says when the Lord brings back the captivity of his people. This has caused some commentators to speculate that this must be a psalm written after the exile, therefore it couldn't have been written by David, or at the very least, that verse 7 is a late addition to the psalm. But this is probably the better translation. It's when the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, which is obviously a broader reference than return from exile. Let Jacob rejoice, let Israel be glad. So there's this confident expectation that God has spoken, that in the future God is with the generation of the righteous, and he will be their refuge and not allow the plans of the enemy to shame the poor to come to fruition. Finally, let's talk about this from the Christian perspective. And what do we make of the psalm? Well, the dominant use of this psalm in the New Testament, which is quite prominent, is to point out the universal corruption of mankind, that people are sinners who can't keep God's law, who can't save themselves, that we need the salvation God provides in Christ. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good. Remember Jesus saying to the rich young man who approached him, "Why do you call me good? There is no one good except God alone." As a theological statement, that is 100% true. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. Romans quotes this passage to support its doctrine of universal sinfulness and depravity. One of the obvious applications of our psalm to the modern life is its overt allusion to atheism. The fool says in his heart, "There is no God." The psalm points out both the cause and the consequence of this kind of belief. So the cause of the claim that there's no God is usually people's desire to cast off this restraints that they despise. They want to live however they want to live, and they don't want a God to exist who tells them what they are and are not allowed to do and be. So usually the driver for the claim there is no God is not so much intellectual doubts as it is immoral desires. It's usually more immoral desires than intellectual doubts. But we also see graphically painted here the consequences of rejecting God, that God's law and word and the fear of the Lord is the single greatest restraint to the sinful tendencies of our fallen nature. When people say there is no God, they then degenerate rapidly into wholesale corruption and depravity. So that's Psalm 14.